I'm really honored to be here on this panel today, presenting alongside other colleagues throughout Indian country and programs. I am also really missing the Southwest, especially after hearing from the Santa Ana and the Navajo Nation. Here in Montana, where I'm based at, we had temperatures yesterday at -27 with a wind chill of I believe it was -30. So it's really chilly up here, and I sure miss the Southwest. But I am calling in from Montana. As Nick mentioned, I work with the USDA Forest Service, so I'll share a little bit different perspective today, coming from a federal agency. But I actively work a lot with my research with tribal communities and focused on recruiting Native Americans into the research and development branch in the Forest Service. So that's sort of me. I wanted to focus the presentation today sort of on these four main topics. Although I'm working in the Rocky Mountain Research Station right now, come April 1st is when I'm jumping into a detail within the Washington office of the Forest Service, serving as the national program lead for tribal research. And so I saw this opportunity to present on this panel as also a way to sort of kind of get the gears going and get a jump start on the detail that I'll be pursuing in the future, sort of serving our entire branch of research and development and how we are partnering with tribes. And so some things really have come down the pipeline that I think are really important for us to all be aware of and to start thinking about how it might impact those in Indian country and folks like myself working for federal agencies, and how it might impact our work. The first thing is this new memo that came out from the White House on incorporating traditional ecological knowledge. The second thing I'd like to talk about is these joint secretarial orders that also came out regarding co-stewardship of federal lands by tribal communities. The third thing I'd like to focus on is within the Forest Service, we have a tribal engagement roadmap, which sort of outlines how we envision working with tribal communities. And then I'd like to share a little bit about our NARA program, which I'll explain later. And then depending on how we're doing on time, share some about the Indian Forest Management Assessment Team that I'm one of the co-authors for, which has some sections within that do focus on woodlands management, which I think is applicable to the Society for Range Management, and then also a topic on non-timber forest products. So it is a bit of a smorgasbord of topics, but I think these are all really timely, and I just would really appreciate feedback, insights, and just sort of, how we can wrap our heads around this. So the first thing is this new memo that came out from the White House. This came out from the Office of Science and Technology and Policy, as well as the CEQ, the Council on Environmental Quality. This came out on November 15th, and it's how we'd like to see things like TEK be sort of integrated into federal decision-making practices. So I just pulled out some quotes from this because I think it's pretty critical to look at. But these commitments include ensuring that federal agencies conduct regular, meaningful, and robust consultation with tribal officials, which we already do, but in the development of research projects, policies, decisions, and especially decisions that may affect tribal nations and the people they represent. In the memo, it also recognized that they call it ITK. I commonly more refer to it as TEK, but TEK as being a form of knowledge, as one of the many important bodies of knowledge that contribute to the scientific, technical, social, and economic advancements of the U.S. and to our collective understanding of the natural world. So when I read that, I thought this is kind of the first time that they're actually putting TEK on par with Western science. And up until this date, I hadn't really seen it in this high level of a document coming out from the White House before. So I think as a Native person, this was really exciting to see, because these are things that I think we've all been advocating for a long time. And we all collectively recognize the knowledge within tribal communities, within our stories, within our ceremonies, our practices, and our connection to place. In this memo, it also, thank goodness, recognizes that ITEK is owned by Indigenous people. So it makes it very clear up front that this is not federal database. This is not, I want to even go so far to interpret this as it could not be FOIA-able information because it is recognized and owned by Indigenous people. So the Office of Science and Technology and excuse me, and then CEQ will also develop this government-wide guidance for federal agencies on ITEK. And so they have a working group that they're putting together this guidance on, and I'll show you the timeline here in a second. But the memo lastly also mentions where appropriate, ITEK can and should inform federal decision-making along with scientific inquiry. So again, I think this is pretty big news within the agency and the Forest Service. To be completely candid and honest, there's myself and 2 others that I know of who are Native that work within R&D. We have a whole bunch of excellent allies and non-Natives who work within research and development that also are trying to advance some of these topics. But we truly are understaffed. We do not really have the capacity to move some of these forward. And since this came out in November, I think our agency is really struggling with how to sort of make some of this start moving. But here's just also, I wanted to put out there to this group, in addition to the memo that came out, there's this interagency working group, the IWG, and they have put out a timeline, which is here. This is not my timeline. This is coming from the interagency working group who will be putting together the guidelines on how we will incorporate ITEK in our decision making. But you know, we're already nearly halfway through this timeline. And so in theory, we're at this phase of the public listening sessions in these various regions. Apparently there has been a tribal consultation. I'm curious to know if anyone in the audience has heard of this. I have yet to kind of do some digging and see if this has happened and follow up on it. And they also have various roundtables and other consultations coming out between now and when they intend to publish their guidance come November. They want to do it during the White House Tribal Nation Summit. So that's sort of the memo. And I think, again, that's important for us to all be aware of. And that's something that I'll definitely be taking and moving forward when my detail begins in April. The other thing I wanted to cover is this joint secretarial order number 3403 that also came out around this time. The title is on fulfilling the trust responsibility to Indian tribes in the stewardship of federal lands and waters. And to us, to me, this just screams like kind of like land back, like very exciting news, I think, for Indian people and for tribes. In this joint secretarial order, it says that the U.S. trust and treaty obligations are an integral part of all of our department's responsibilities in managing federal lands. And this is for DOI and the Department of Agriculture. And they outline exactly what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to safeguard tribal interests. We're supposed to start making agreements on co-stewardship of federal lands, which is phenomenally exciting. We're supposed to identify opportunities to consolidate tribal homelands. We're supposed to be prepared to do a legal review of the current authorities that are out there already for us to utilize. And then each department is also supposed to be issuing a report on actions taken to fulfill this order that's coming out. So again, I just wanted to kind of put these out amongst this group. I think they're really important authorities that are coming out, and I think it's a quite exciting time. So I guess for me now, I'm like, well, where do we go now? And we all were supposed to be there in Albuquerque. I was really looking forward to meeting with some folks in person. And I'll admit, if we did meet in Albuquerque, I probably would have snuck away for half an afternoon to go out to Laguna and to spend some time there. But I'm thinking, you know, how, like, for instance, how does this apply to Laguna? Like, how do our wildlife managers and natural resource professionals start expanding from what they're already doing at Laguna to beyond, onto the adjacent national forests and the BLM lands, National Park Service lands, whatnot. And I just think that there's a lot of opportunity, kind of in the comment that was shared earlier during our session here today. But there is an immense amount of opportunity. And so I just want to bring up two quick maps. The top left one shows tribal reservations. So we have 56 million acres, 2.3%, give or take, of the continuous lower 48. And then our national forests and grasslands, 193 million acres. Jointly together, I mean, that's, you know, a little bit over 6% of the landscape, but that doesn't include, like I said, BLM lands, National Park Service lands, all the other lands within the Department of Interior and USDA as well. So this, I think, as far as like starting to manage at a large landscape scale, protecting large corridors, ensuring that our communities can adapt and mitigate in changing climates, we're actually finally at the scale where we can maybe start gaining some traction on some of this, given these new joint secretarial orders and then that memo that came out. So now I'll just switch gears and talk a little bit more, hone in on what the Forest Service R&D has done and up until now. And this roadmap was published prior to that order and the memo coming out. But I do want to point out this reference. It's a pretty valuable document. It's really just intended to sort of guide our scientists in how we're supposed to interact with tribal communities and Native people. Within this roadmap, it does connect to the Office of Tribal Relations strategic plan. So they have their whole they're like the clearinghouse of the tribal consultation part of our agency. But this document does connect to what they work on. And following the publication of this roadmap document was a highlights document, sort of showcasing some of the work that we have been doing. And within the roadmap, it does extensively cover things like tribal sovereignty and TEK. But I just wanted to list out these main objectives because, again, I would just love to hear folks' feedback on some of this. This was pretty inclusive, but our first objective was to enhance partnerships with tribes, Indigenous and Native groups, tribal colleges, which is great, tribal communities and intertribal organizations. Within our roadmap, we also wanted to institutionalize our trust, responsibility, and tribal engagement within Forest Service R&D. We also had an objective of increasing and advancing tribal and Indigenous values, knowledge, and perspectives within R&D, including both operational and research activities. You know, so you can think of, you know, a scientist that's been in the agency for decades that focuses on, you know, maybe ponderosa pine regeneration or, you know, anything related to sort of the wildlife whole discipline, and how are those, you know, research projects interfacing with tribal communities that might be concerned about those findings. Are they using, you know, any sort of co-production methods or Indigenous research methodologies at all? How are they delivering their science and their findings to tribal communities that might be concerned about what's going on? The other objective is to network and coordinate within R&D and across deputy areas to increase agency and R&D program efficiency or efficacy. And then advance research on topics of joint interest through a collaborative and participatory approach with tribes and tribal organizations. And then the last one is to develop and deploy research and technologies to support tribal decision-making on natural resource issues. So for me, that last one really gets at, like, are we even addressing tribal research needs as the world's largest forestry science organization? Like, are we actually listening to what tribes need information on? So those are things that we're really asking ourselves. So in addition to that roadmap, I'll just highlight some of these great, we do have a wonderful program called the Native American Research Assistantship Program. Unfortunately, we are not like the BIA. We don't have Indian hiring preference. But this program in particular helps us sort of recruit and retain early career Native scholars who are interested in science and in research. And so this program has been around, I believe, since 2015. I've utilized it every single year to hire various Native students, and it's just a phenomenal one. So I think, yeah, I selfishly listed mine first. Mine is the long-term demography study and habitat monitoring, looking at wildfire assessment and risk for the spotted owl, working with the Mescalero Apache tribe in New Mexico. One of the other NARA projects is where a student went and helped out with the black-backed woodpeckers in the Black Hills. I believe that was in 2018. In 2020, a project came out where they did some bat surveys and greater sage-grouse vegetation surveys in the national grasslands of South Dakota. So these all were nationwide. The way it works is a Forest Service scientist will put together a proposal and send it to the Wildlife Society, as well as a small committee of individuals that looks at how that research might incorporate things like TEK. They look at the relevancy of these projects to tribal communities, and then they select the projects, and then the projects go out and they recruit the students for them. And then students receive, I think it's anywhere from $5,000 to $7,000 to go partake in these opportunities. A local one here in Montana, they did some eDNA sampling for native fish in the Pacific Northwest, and that was with Kelly Kareen here in the Rocky Mountain Research Station. Another NARA project was looking at the effects of bison on vegetation and birds in the tallgrass prairie. And then my colleague Jonathan Long in the Pacific Southwest Research Station ran this project for, I believe, 2 years, looking at restoration treatments to promote plants and animals that were important to the Washoe tribe in Northern California and in Western Nevada. So those are the NARA projects that I just wanted to highlight there. And then I think I'll just kind of end on this last slide here, talking about IFMAT for a second. And this is, I'm one of the co-authors for this IFMAT report. We have a total of 4 co-authors. And this is a 2-year-long project. The short acronym is IFMAT, the Indian Forest Management Assessment Team. It comes from the National Indian Forest Resource Management Act of 1990, which requires decadal assessments of tribal forests and forest management in the US. So we've had IFMAT 1 was done in 1993, IFMAT, oops, there's a typo. IFMAT 2 was done in 2003, IFMAT 3 was done in 2013, which I participated in as a graduate student observer. And then IFMAT 4 is coming out. We just started our process. We're about one year or so into it. But the Intertribal Timber Council is the Native organization that contracts out independent teams of co-authors to produce this report. I believe we have 12 technical specialists working with us, and then 5 Native graduate students as well. And again, it's a decadal assessment looking at the status of tribal forests, but forests also do include woodlands. And in the past, you know, it's kind of no surprise that do get sort of the bulk of the glamour, unfortunately, which I, as someone who has ties to the Southwest, I really don't appreciate that. And so I'm trying my hardest to make sure that we're really looking at closely at woodlands and how much tribes are receiving for their funding for woodlands. And, you know, woodlands are an important place for ceremony, for wildlife habitat. It is an immensely growing forest type as far as, you know, the need, because tribes also don't receive adequate funding to even manage their woodlands. So the risks there are just double whammy for woodlands. So again, our report is due to Congress in 2023. We are sampling just around 46 different tribes that range in land ownership, governance structure type, forest types. They are sampled well across the United States. So we go all the way up to Penobscot, down to Seminole as well. through the Southwest and up in the Pacific Northwest and in the Lake States as well. So we got a pretty good sampling scheme. Of course, we'd like to sample all tribes, but funding doesn't support that, nor do we have the time necessarily. But one of the tasks within NFIRMA that is actually written into law is Task B, and it does talk about the health and the condition of tribal forests in this sort of new lens that we're really looking into it through is looking at taking a deep dive into woodlands. And the BIA did put together a woodlands handbook, and we're trying to figure out if tribes are even utilizing that or not, how valuable it is. And then we're incorporating a whole new sort of way to evaluate non-timber forest products. So you can think of those as things like, anything from beargrass to sage to first foods, to even game species, anything that is coming off the forest that is, a non-timber forest product. So it's not a commercial timber species, but it is in the forest. And we're working with Marla Emery to develop a very brief questionnaire to sort of quantify the value of those non-timber forest products to tribal communities. And really the bottom line, I guess what we're really trying to strive for in IFMAT is identifying and showing to Congress if tribes are even receiving the adequate funding and staffing to take care of these valuable resources. So we're really trying to quantify some of these things, and just really excited about that IFMAT opportunity. So with that, I know that was a giant smorgasbord of stuff, but I do just want to pause and say thanks again, Dawa A. I really appreciate it. I might have gone over on my time, but there's my email if anyone wants to reach out. And I just, again, I'm so thankful to partake in this today. So with that, I'll just stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. We got time for one question.
Okay, great.
So if anyone has any questions or feedback, thank you, Sarah, for presenting, and good luck on your new detail coming up.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it.
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, there is. Here we go. How about exotic invasive woodland species such as tamarisk and Russian olive trees? Are these included in the woodland assessments?
Yeah, so in some of our instances, when we are doing our tribal site visits and our virtual calls with like the BIA regional offices, topics like that are coming up. So we're trying to figure out what funding source tribes are utilizing to address issues like invasive species, like you mentioned. The other big thing too is feral horses. We're trying our best to quantify that problem throughout Indian country. But yes, invasive species is definitely within one of the metrics of that task B, looking at the status and condition of forests, for sure. Yeah, thank you for that question, Tony. Sorry I missed it earlier.
That's a good segue for our next speakers.